The quintuplets. A woman, pregnant with 5 girls, was abandoned and humiliated by her partner, who left her for another. On the day of his wedding, she makes a surprise appearance and reveals a truth so shocking it leaves all the guests completely speechless. Before you watch, like this video, subscribe to our channel, and comment where you're from so we can deliver even more videos like this. 5 heartbeats. Dr. Collins's words echoed in the exam room like thunder, causing Clara to clutch the exam table so tightly her fingers turned white. 5, she whispered in disbelief as the doctor pointed out each small pulse on the monitor. The world spun violently around her, abandoned just a month ago, without a home since she discovered the fraudulent mortgage. And now this, quintuplets. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in her throat, transforming into sobs that shook her entire body. "He says I could never do it alone," she murmured through tears. In that moment, something crystalline and fierce awoke inside her, a wild determination she didn't even recognize in herself. "I'm going to prove him wrong," she declared, her voice transformed, as she protectively placed a hand on the belly that now carried not 1, but 5 reasons to never give up again. Leaving the office, the weight of the diagnosis, a high-risk pregnancy, and the list of precautions and special care seemed to crush her shoulders. How could she afford the costs? How could she raise 5 children alone? His last words before leaving echoed in her mind like a cruel sentence, almost a curse. The apartment, once a sanctuary of love, now felt like a prison of painful memories. Clara spent hours lying on the sofa, her hands resting on her still flat belly, trying to process the magnitude of what was to come. The nauseating scent of the birthday cake, the one she had lovingly prepared to celebrate 3 years of their relationship, still lingered in the air like a ghost of shattered dreams. 3 weeks before this life-changing diagnosis, Clara had lived the most devastating moment of her existence. The sweet smell of vanilla filled the small apartment as she adjusted the oven temperature. Her skilled hands worked with meticulous precision, beating the cake batter that would symbolize 3 years of shared love, 3 years of laughter, dreams, and whispered promises in the dead of night. Have you ever felt that sensation that everything in your life is finally falling into place? That rare moment when the universe seems to conspire in your favor and the future unfolds before you like a lit road. That's exactly how Clara felt that autumn afternoon. As she carefully decorated the cake with small sugar flowers, her mind wandered between memories of the past and dreams of the future. The sound of the front door interrupted her thoughts. Her hands froze in midair, the pastry bag still suspended over the cake. Something was wrong. It wasn't the usual sound of keys, nor the cheerful call that always announced his arrival. There was a heaviness in the air, an almost palpable density that made her heart race. "Clara." His voice was so different from normal, distant, almost cold. His eyes didn't meet hers, but stared at an indeterminate spot on the kitchen wall. The next few hours blurred into a haze of words that cut like blades. "I can't do this anymore. I met someone else. I don't feel the same way." Each phrase pierced deeper than the last, crumbling the sandcastle she had so carefully built. "How long?" she managed to ask, her voice almost unrecognizable even to herself. 6 months, he replied, and that number echoed in her mind like a funeral bell. 6 months. While she was planning surprises and believing in vows of eternal love, he was building a parallel life, an alternate universe where she didn't exist. The clock on the wall seemed to move in slow motion as he gathered his belongings. 3 years of shared life reduced to 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. When the door closed, the silence that filled the apartment was deafening. Clara remained motionless, sitting on the cold kitchen floor. The now nauseating scent of the cake still permeated the air. On the table, an envelope with a few bills, the physical definition of what she was worth to him. The small blue wrapper remained in the drawer, hiding the positive pregnancy test she didn't even have a chance to show. Now, back in the present in the doctor's office, the shock of the quintuplets still reverberating through her body, Clara felt something awaken inside her as she stared at the monitor. It was as if a stubborn spark refused to go out. Baking. That's what she had always been good at, ever since she was a child with her grandmother. The cakes that enchanted family and friends, the techniques she had perfected over the years, the family recipes carefully guarded in a worn notebook. It was as if a door had opened in her mind. Why not? What did she have to lose? If the world wanted to knock her down, she would respond by getting up even stronger. The next day, with her hair in an unpretentious bun and dark circles under her eyes that told the story of sleepless nights, Clara walked into Mr. Gomez's small bakery, 3 blocks down from her apartment. "I need a job," she said simply, handing the gray-haired man a small package. Inside were 6 meticulously decorated cupcakes. Mr. Gomez looked at the sweets with a critical eye, then tried one. His face transformed instantly, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening into a genuine smile. "Girl, this is extraordinary." He seemed to be searching for the right word. That's how it began. A small corner in Mr. Gomez's bakery, a few basic ingredients, and Clara's talented hands. The first month was one of trial and error, of constant doubts and small victories. Customers started to notice, started to ask for the new woman's cake, started placing specific orders. Meanwhile, her belly grew, housing the multiple miracles she was carrying. The medical costs accumulated, but now a small savings account was growing too. A savings account built with sugar, flour, and determination. The news spread in the small town. A young baker, pregnant with quintuplets, abandoned by her partner, was building her own path with talent and perseverance. People started coming, not just for the taste of the sweets, but for the story behind them. They wanted to support her. They wanted to be part of that improbable journey. On a particularly busy afternoon, as Clara delicately piped whipped cream onto a row of cupcakes, the chime of the door announced a new customer. She looked up and met the curious gaze of a tall man in a well-cut suit. "I was told I'd find the best sweets in town here," he commented, approaching the counter. Clara smiled politely, offering a small tasting. The man, whom she would later discover was Richard Mendez, the owner of a growing hotel chain, savored the sweet slowly, closing his eyes to appreciate every nuance of flavor. "Impressive," he murmured. "Simply impressive." The next week, Richard returned with a proposal. He needed an exclusive pastry chef for the restaurant in his newest hotel, someone who could create unique desserts that would become the establishment's signature. "Why me?" Clara asked, genuinely confused by the interest of the successful businessman. "Because you put something in your sweets that can't be found anywhere else," he replied simply. "You put your soul into them." The offer was tempting. A fixed salary, a professional environment, and the possibility of growth. But there were complications. Her pregnancy was advancing. Doctors recommended rest. And soon there would be 5 newborns demanding full attention. "I can't offer exclusive dedication right now," she explained, her hands unconsciously protective of her prominent belly. Richard's gaze fell on the gesture, understanding softening his features. "I'm aware of your situation," he admitted, "and my proposal takes that into account. We can adapt schedules, create a suitable space. The important thing is having you and your talent." That was the first moment Clara felt that maybe, just maybe, things could work out, that there was a possible path, even in the face of the seemingly impossible. Do you think Clara can truly succeed on her own, or will she need Richard's help? The Sweet Empire. Autumn gave way to winter, and winter to spring. Clara's belly grew along with her reputation as a pastry chef. The sweets at Richard's hotel became famous in the region, attracting specific customers to try her exclusive creations. She developed her own decoration technique, mixing traditional methods with contemporary touches, creating pieces that were as beautiful to look at as they were delicious to eat. And then, in a whirlwind of events, the quintuplets came into the world. 5 perfectly healthy girls, defying all statistics and pessimistic predictions. 5 little warriors who, like their mother, seemed determined to prove that the impossible was just a matter of perspective. The first few months were a test of physical and emotional endurance. Sleepless nights, constant worries, and complex logistics to care for 5 babies simultaneously. But Clara was no longer alone. Mr. Gomez had become a kind of surrogate grandfather to the girls. Richard offered financial and emotional support, visiting regularly with gifts and words of encouragement. The community had mobilized, creating a support network that sustained Clara in the most difficult moments. When the quintuplets turned 6 months old, Richard showed up with a different proposal. He wanted Clara to have her own space, her own pastry shop. He would be the investor. She would be the creative mind and administrator. "You proved him wrong," Richard commented as he explained the details of the business plan. "He said you could never do it alone. But look around. You didn't just succeed, you flourished." The comment touched a still open wound. Clara rarely talked about her ex-partner, the abandonment, or the pain. She had channeled all that energy into her daughters and her art. But occasionally, in the silent moments between one task and another, the memory would return. The doubt would whisper. What would he think if he saw her now? The truth was, he had never tried to find out. He had never sought to discover if the pregnancy had resulted in healthy births. He had never shown the slightest interest in the fate of Clara or the daughters who carried his DNA. It was as if that part of his life had been completely erased, replaced by new characters, new scenarios. Clara accepted Richard's proposal. The small space on the main street began to take shape, transforming into a cozy and elegant pastry shop. The pastel-colored walls, the carefully lit display cases, and the irresistible aroma that escaped through the door whenever a customer entered or left. Everything reflected the personality of its owner. Sweet Dreams opened its doors on a sunny spring morning when the quintuplets were 1 year old. The 5 girls, dressed in coordinated shades, were the main attraction. Charming customers with identical smiles and already distinct personalities. That night, after the successful inauguration, Clara settled her daughters in their cribs and sat on the balcony of her new, larger, more comfortable apartment located above the pastry shop. Looking at the stars, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection on the journey she had taken. A year ago, she was heartbroken, facing an uncertain future with 5 lives depending solely on her. Now, she was the owner of a promising business, the mother of 5 healthy girls, surrounded by people who genuinely cared. "You did it," she told herself. "You really did it." And that small voice of doubt, the one that used to echo his words, "You'll never make it alone," finally fell silent. What Clara didn't know, as she savored this personal victory, was that fate still had a final encounter with the past reserved for her. An encounter that would prove, once and for all, that sometimes the best revenge isn't retaliation, but simply living well and happily. After all, what better answer to a broken promise than the building of entirely new dreams? The final revelation, the aroma of caramelized sugar and fresh vanilla, filled the small, Sweet Dreams pastry shop as the golden light of dawn filtered through the large windows. Clara adjusted the temperature of the main oven, her body moving with the familiarity of someone who knew every inch of that space. On the walls, framed with elegant simplicity, 5 identical photographs showed the same smile multiplied by 5. Her girls, now 18 months old, were captured in a moment of pure joy. Have you ever stopped to think about how life's greatest challenges can turn into your greatest blessings? How what seems to be the end of a road may in fact be just the redirection to a much more rewarding one. Sweet Dreams was celebrating 6 months of existence and was already a landmark in the city. What began as a small corner in Mr. Gomez's bakery was now its own establishment, with a loyal clientele and a waiting list for special orders. The traditional family recipes gained contemporary touches in Clara's talented hands, creating a unique signature that people traveled for miles to experience. "Mommy, look!" The childish voice came from the small space at the back of the pastry shop, specially adapted for the quintuplets. Maria, the most expressive of the 5, proudly pointed to a colorful drawing where 5 small stick figures held what appeared to be cakes. Clara smiled, crouching down to her daughter's height. "It's beautiful, my love. Is that you all helping Mommy in the bakery?" Maria nodded energetically, her blonde curls bouncing. "When we get big, we're going to make cakes just like you." The simplicity of that phrase brought tears to Clara's eyes. Amid the daily chaos of running a growing business and raising 5 children simultaneously, it was these small moments that reaffirmed her choice. The choice to move forward, to build something new, to turn pain into fuel for bigger dreams. The chime of the front door announced the arrival of the day's first customer. Clara adjusted her uniform, an elegant pastel-colored apron with the bakery logo embroidered on it, and walked to the counter with her best smile. "Good morning, how can I help you?" The gray-haired woman on the other side of the counter wasn't just any customer. Anita Vasconcelos, a renowned food critic and columnist for the regional newspaper, was known for her demanding palate and merciless reviews. "I hear your pistachio and raspberry eclairs are capable of transporting someone directly to heaven," Anita commented, her shrewd eyes observing every detail of the environment. Clara's heart raced, but her hands remained steady as she served the specialty. This moment could define the future of her small business. A positive review from Anita would mean visibility throughout the region. A negative one could compromise months of hard work. Anita bit into the pastry with deliberate slowness, closing her eyes to concentrate on the sensations. The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. "In 25 years as a critic," she finally declared, "I can count on one hand the times a dessert has left me genuinely speechless." Her eyes met Clara's, and for the first time, a smile softened her severe features. "Congratulations, my dear. You're not just making sweets, you're creating experiences." That same afternoon, Richard appeared at the pastry shop, carrying a bouquet of fresh lilies and the day's newspaper. In Anita's column, an enthusiastic review occupied half the page with the title, "Sweet Dreams, the flavor empire built by resilient female hands." "This deserves a celebration," Richard announced, his eyes shining with the same pride a father would show. In the months that followed that review, the small pastry shop saw its business triple. Clara had to hire 3 assistants to keep up with the growing demand. The menu expanded, incorporating new creations that blended tradition and innovation. The quintuplets, now chattering non-stop, became the unofficial mascots of the business, charming customers with their distinct personalities despite their identical appearances. It was during this period of prosperity that Clara received an unexpected invitation. The mayor of a neighboring city was organizing a regional gastronomic festival and wanted Sweet Dreams to be one of the representative establishments. "I don't know if I can do it," Clara confessed to Richard during a late dinner after the girls were asleep. "The festival lasts 3 full days. How will I manage with the little ones?" Richard, who over the months had become more than an investor, a friend, a support, a constant presence in their lives, held her hand across the table. "You're not alone on this journey, Clara. You'll never be again." There was an intensity in his gaze that made something awaken in her chest, a warmth she had almost forgotten, a possibility she had buried along with her broken heart. The festival was a milestone. The Sweet Dreams booth, decorated with elegant simplicity and pastel tones, attracted lines that stretched for yards. Clara, assisted by her staff and occasionally relieved by Richard so she could take care of the girls, presented exclusive creations inspired by local culture. Her reinterpretation of the traditional roll cake, with a touch of cardamom and red fruit glaze, was voted the event's standout dessert. Journalists from larger statewide publications approached, wanting to know the story behind the talented pastry chef and her quintuplets. Clara shared her journey with caution, always emphasizing her triumph and never the abandonment. She talked about how every obstacle had been a stepping stone to something bigger, how every disappointment hid an opportunity. "If you could go back in time," a reporter asked, "would you change anything about your path?" The question caught Clara by surprise. She looked at her 5 daughters, who were playing happily under Richard's watchful eye, and felt a crystalline certainty. "Not a single second," she replied with serenity. "Every tear shed, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, it all brought me exactly to where I need to be." Upon returning to the city after the festival's success, Clara found something unexpected in her mailbox. A formal proposal from a publisher interested in publishing a recipe book signed by her. "The Sweetness of Resilience, Recipes and Stories from an Unlikely Journey" was the suggested title. "I'm not a writer," Clara protested, showing the letter to Richard during one of their now frequent dinners. "But you're a natural storyteller," he argued. "Each of your sweets tells a story. Why not put them on paper?" That night, after the girls had fallen asleep, Clara sat at the small desk in the corner of her room and began to write. Not just recipes, but memories. The first time she made cookies with her grandmother at 6, standing on her tiptoes to reach the counter. The birthday cake she made for her father, clumsily decorated, but received with tears of emotion. The feeling of making her first professional sale at Mr. Gomez's bakery. And then, the more recent stories. How she discovered that Lily, one of the quintuplets, had a natural talent for separating egg yolks from whites without breaking them, even with her tiny hands. How Sophia always chose the best strawberries when they went shopping. How Beatrice, Maria, and Ava would seriously debate which topping would look best on each cake, like little pastry experts. Words flowed, sometimes interrupted by tears, no longer of sadness, but of a deep gratitude for the path she had taken. Clara was rediscovering her story through writing, re-signifying every difficult moment in the light of where she was now. The book was published 6 months later, coinciding with the quintuplet's 2nd birthday. The book signing at her own pastry shop turned into a community event. People lined up not just for their signed copy, but to share how Clara's story had inspired them in their own struggles. "Your book gave me the courage to start over after my divorce," a middle-aged woman confided, squeezing Clara's hand with emotion. "I read your story to my teenage daughter, who was being bullied at school," another client shared. "She said that if you could raise 5 daughters and build a business from scratch, she can handle a few mean girls." Those words touched Clara deeply, She had never imagined that her personal journey could impact so many lives beyond her own. She had transformed pain into purpose, despair into hope. Not just for herself, but for others too. The book's success brought new opportunities. A regional television network invited her for a weekly segment on pastry. Home appliance companies wanted her to endorse their products. Invitations to lead workshops in other cities arose. Clara chose carefully, always prioritizing what would allow her to balance career and motherhood. The quintuplets remained her center, her moral compass, her reason for getting up every morning and persisting. On one particularly busy afternoon at the pastry shop, while preparing a special order for a major wedding, Clara received a call from the girls' kindergarten. Beatrice had fallen during recess and needed to be taken to the emergency room to check for a fractured wrist. Without hesitation, Clara dropped everything and rushed to the school. At the hospital, while waiting for the X-ray results, she hugged a tearful Beatrice, and the other 4 girls sat quietly under the vigilant eye of the teacher who had accompanied them. Clara felt the weight of the unique responsibility she carried. It was in that moment that Richard appeared, out of breath from running from the parking lot, carrying 5 small, identical teddy bears. "I came as soon as I got your message," he explained, handing a bear to each girl and saving a special one with a bandaged paw for Beatrice. The little girl's eyes lit up with delight, momentarily forgetting the pain. "Look, Mommy, he's hurt just like me." Clara looked at Richard, at the thoughtfulness of that gesture, at the way he genuinely cared. And something solidified in her heart, something that had been silently growing, like cake batter slowly expanding in the warmth of the oven. Later that night, with the girls finally asleep, Beatrice, with her slightly sprained wrist properly bandaged and her injured teddy bear held tightly, Clara and Richard sat on the apartment balcony above the pastry shop. "Thank you for today," she said simply, the words seeming insufficient to express the depth of her gratitude. Richard looked at her for a long moment, as if gathering his courage. "Clara, I need to tell you something I've been holding on to for a while." She felt her heart race, a mix of anticipation and fear taking hold of her chest. "Over the past 2 years, I've watched you turn a devastating situation into something extraordinary. I've watched you build a business from nothing, raise 5 incredible girls, and inspire an entire community." He paused, searching for the right words, and in the process, without realizing it, you rebuilt something I thought was permanently broken. My ability to love again. The world seemed to hang in suspense as those words hovered between them. Clara felt silent tears slide down her cheeks, not tears of sadness or fear, but of recognition, of possibility, of a future she had not allowed herself to imagine. "I'm not asking for an answer now," Richard continued softly. "I just wanted you to know that if you're ready to open your heart again, I'll be here. I've been here this whole time." That night, lying in her bed, Clara reflected on how life operates in unexpected cycles. How what seems to be the end can, in fact, be just the prelude to something much grander. How sometimes everything has to fall apart for you to rebuild on a more solid foundation. What she still didn't know was that fate had one more twist in store, one that would close the cycle in an unexpected and definitive way. But that story was yet to come, patiently waiting for its moment to reveal itself. For now, there were 5 small breaths in the room next door, a thriving pastry shop below, a book with her name on the cover, and the possibility of a new love blossoming on her horizon. Sometimes, life offers second chances. Sometimes, those chances come disguised as catastrophes. And sometimes, we only realize the true value of those opportunities when we look back and see the path we've traveled, with all its unexpected turns and seemingly senseless detours. After all, the most memorable cakes are not necessarily the ones that follow the recipe to the letter, but the ones that incorporate spontaneous adjustments and unexpected ingredients. Clara was learning that the same is true for life. The pink petals of the cherry trees danced in the air like tiny parachutes, covering the municipal park lawn with a delicate carpet. Clara watched her 5 daughters, now 3 years old, running among the flowering trees, their blonde hair shining in the spring sun. The synchronized laughter of the girls filled the space like the purest of melodies. Have you ever experienced that unique feeling of looking at your life and almost not recognizing it? Not because it's unrecognizable, but because it has become more beautiful than you ever dared to dream? Clara was living that moment as her fingers discreetly intertwined with Richard's, sitting beside her on the park bench. "They're tireless," he commented, genuine admiration in his voice. 5 little hurricanes. "Little hurricanes with the precision of a tornado," Clara replied, laughing as the quintuplets, in perfect synchrony, decided to change direction and run to the other side of the park. The last 12 months had brought transformations as significant as the first moments after the abandonment. Sweet Dreams was no longer just a local pastry shop, but a growing brand. After the success of the recipe book, invitations for lectures and participation in gastronomic events came, and, most excitingly, the opportunity to open a second store in the state capital. But the most profound change wasn't in the business. It was there, in the simplicity of those intertwined fingers, in the comfort of a shared silence, in the quiet certainty of having found not just a partner, but a companion on her journey. The transition from friendship to romance with Richard had happened gradually, without haste, respecting the time Clara needed to heal old wounds. It began with dinners after the pastry shop closed, evolved into weekend outings with the girls, and culminated, 3 months ago, with a hesitant kiss under the Christmas lights that decorated the town square. "What are you thinking about?" Richard asked, noticing her contemplative look. "About how unpredictable life is," she replied, watching Maria, always the leader among the sisters, organize some elaborate game. 3 years ago, I was lying on the kitchen floor with a broken heart and no idea how I would move forward. She didn't need to finish. Richard gently squeezed her hand, understanding the weight of that transformation. "Mommy, Uncle Richard, look what we found!" Sophia, the most observant of the 5, ran toward them holding something in her cupped hands. When she opened her hands, she revealed a small butterfly with vibrant blue wings resting calmly on her palm. "She's hurt?" Sophia explained, her little face twisted in genuine concern. "We need to take care of her." The other 4 girls approached, forming a protective semicircle around their sister and the wounded butterfly. The scene deeply touched Clara, the natural compassion of those children, their instinctive tendency to protect the vulnerable, to heal what was broken. "Where does that come from?" she had once asked the pediatrician during a routine checkup. This sensitivity of theirs to the suffering of others. The doctor had smiled knowingly. "Children mirror what they experience, Clara. They were cared for with love even in the most difficult circumstances. They are just giving back what they received." In the park, Richard crouched down to the girls' level, carefully examining the butterfly. "I think she's just resting," he explained gently. "We'll make a temporary little house for her to recover, and then we'll let her fly again. What do you think?" The approval was unanimous, with 5 little heads nodding affirmatively. That was another quality Clara admired in Richard, his ability to communicate with the girls on their level, without ever underestimating their understanding or infantilizing them unnecessarily. As they walked back home, or more precisely, to the spacious apartment above the pastry shop where they now lived, Clara watched the interaction between Richard and the girls. How he perfectly balanced authority and affection, how he patiently answered the endless questions of Beatrice, the most curious, how he respected the introspective moments of Ava, the quietest, how he appreciated the fanciful stories of Lily, the most imaginative. That night, after a lively dinner and the elaborate ritual of getting 5 girls ready for bed, baths, toothbrushing, bedtime stories, a different one for each, according to their personalities, goodnight kisses, and final checks for non-existent monsters under the beds. Clara found Richard in the kitchen, preparing tea for the two of them. "Something special happened today," he commented casually. But there was a note in his voice that immediately captured Clara's attention. "What was it?" Richard poured the tea into 2 cups, taking his time. "I got a call from an old contact in the hotel industry, Laurent Dupont. Know him?" Clara shook her head no. "He's one of the biggest names in contemporary French gastronomy. He has a chain of boutique hotels with Michelin-starred restaurants in several European cities." Clara's curiosity grew. And what did he want? "He's expanding into Latin America. He opened a hotel in Rio 6 months ago and is now looking for partners for the pastry sector." Richard paused meaningfully. "He read your book, Clara, and wants Sweet Dreams to be the exclusive dessert provider for the hotel restaurant." The information hit Clara like a wave. A partnership of that caliber would mean international visibility, completely new creative challenges, and expansive possibilities for her brand. She searched for the right word, extraordinary. "There's more," Richard continued, a cryptic expression on his face. "Laurent doesn't just want your sweets. He wants you. Your name, your story, your presence. He has proposed an exchange program, 3 months in Paris, learning advanced French pastry techniques, followed by the development of an exclusive line of desserts that blends European techniques with Brazilian flavors." Paris. The word came out as an incredulous whisper. 3 months in Paris. Clara's mind immediately raced in multiple directions. The professional opportunity was undeniably tempting. Paris, the epicenter of world pastry. Learning directly from masters of the craft, a global platform for her art. But then other thoughts arose. 3 months away from the girls was unthinkable. They had never spent more than a few hours apart from her. How would she manage the pastry shop from a distance, and her still recent relationship with Richard? As if reading her thoughts, Richard spoke up. "Before you start listing all the obstacles, Laurent was very clear. The invitation includes accommodations for you and the girls. And," he hesitated briefly, "for me, if we want." Clara looked at him, surprised. "You would drop everything for 3 months to accompany us to Paris?" Richard's smile was calm, confident. "Clara, I would drop everything permanently if I needed to be with you all. 3 months in Paris? I can manage my business remotely. Make a few short trips if necessary. It's no sacrifice at all." There was something in Richard's serene determination that made Clara's heart expand. How different this mature love, built on a solid foundation of respect and mutual admiration, was from that first relationship that ended so painfully. "I need to think," she said finally. "Talk to the girls, consider all the implications." "Of course," Richard agreed without hesitation. "Laurent doesn't expect an immediate answer. We have time." In the days that followed, Clara wavered between enthusiasm and apprehension. She consulted her team at the pastry shop, who unanimously encouraged her. She talked to the quintuplets, using age-appropriate language, explaining about the city of lights and the country of croissants. To her surprise, the idea of an adventure abroad was met with childish excitement, especially when she mentioned that they could see the Eiffel Tower in person, just like in the illustrated book they loved so much. The final decision came during a quiet evening, when Clara was working in the pastry shop kitchen, after hours, experimenting with a new macaroon recipe using typically Brazilian ingredients. Richard watched her in silence from the doorway, admiring the concentration on her face and the precision of her movements. "I always knew you would be great," he commented, finally approaching. "Ever since the first sweet I tasted in that little corner of Mr. Gomez's bakery." Clara smiled without taking her eyes off the delicate macaroon shell she was molding. "And you think I should accept?" "I think you've already decided," Richard replied softly. "You're just looking for confirmation." She stopped, looking at him with surprise at his insight. He was right. Deep down, the decision had already been made. Her adventurous spirit, her dedication to professional growth, her desire to offer her daughters enriching experiences, it all pointed to a single answer. "We're going to Paris," she finally declared, a quiet conviction in her voice. The preparations for the international sojourn were an organized whirlwind. Clara developed new processes in the pastry shop, ensuring everything would run perfectly in her absence. The managers of her 2 stores received intensive training. Documents were provided, vaccinations were updated, and suitcases were carefully packed. The farewell from Mr. Gomez, now with fragile health but an unwavering spirit, was especially emotional. The elderly baker, who had first believed in her talent when she herself doubted, held her hands firmly. "I'm proud of you, girl," he said, tears shining in his tired eyes. "You'll conquer Paris, just like you conquered our city." The trip went surprisingly well, considering it was the quintuplets' first experience on a plane. The 5 girls, equipped with identical backpacks but in different colors, the system Clara had developed to individualize without creating rivalries, alternated between absolute excitement and exhausted naps during the long flight. The arrival in Paris was like stepping into a dream. Laurent Dupont personally greeted them at the airport, demonstrating a genuinely French charm by greeting each of the quintuplets by name, something that impressed Clara. He had clearly done his research. The apartment provided for them exceeded all expectations. Spacious, elegant, just a 10-minute walk from the hotel where Clara would work, and next to a charming park and an international school that accepted the quintuplets for a temporary program. The first few days were for adapting to the time zone and the language. Fortunately, Richard spoke fluent French. To the customs and the new flavors. The girls, with the natural adaptability of childhood, quickly became enchanted with their new temporary reality. They were fascinated by the simplest details, the carousels in the parks, the little boats on the Seine, the street musicians, and the different way French children dressed. Clara divided her time between intensive learning at Laurent's hotel and exploring the city with her daughters and Richard. In the mornings, she immersed herself in the world of refined French pastry techniques, absorbing knowledge she would never have had access to in Brazil. In the afternoons, after picking the girls up from school, they transformed into enthusiastic tourists, discovering Paris through the children's wondrous eyes. In the evenings, after putting the quintuplets to bed, Clara and Richard would share a glass of wine on the apartment balcony, overlooking the Parisian rooftops, discussing the day, making plans, and deepening the connection that was growing between them. It was during one of those nights, about a month after their arrival, that Richard surprised Clara with a small velvet box. "It's not what you're thinking," he said, seeing her eyes widen. "Or maybe it's partially." Inside the box wasn't a ring, but a key. "It's to my house," Richard explained. "The house I bought 3 years ago in the hills, the one with the big garden and the view of the valley. I never told you why I bought it. Such a large property for a single man." Clara watched him, curious. "I bought it thinking about the future, a future that, at the time, seemed improbable, but one I couldn't stop dreaming of." He held her hands tenderly. "Clara, I'm not asking for an answer now. I just want you to know that when we get back, there's a place waiting for you all. A place with enough rooms for 5 energetic girls. A pastry studio we can equip however you want. And room to grow in every sense. Clara's eyes filled with tears. They weren't tears of hesitation or fear, but of recognition. Recognition that sometimes life offers second chances, so magnificent that they make the initial losses seem necessary. Essential steps to get to where you need to be. "Richard," she began, her voice choked with emotion. "You—" Before she could finish, the phone rang. The temporary French phone, whose number very few people had. It was late at night, which made the call even more unusual. With her heart racing from an inexplicable premonition, Clara answered. The voice on the other end was her manager back in Brazil, usually calm and efficient, now visibly flustered. "Clara, sorry to call so late, but—" A pause laden with tension. "I got a quote request for a wedding cake. A very specific request for a very particular event." "And what's the problem?" Clara asked, confused by the apparent urgency. The answer came like a blow that reverberated across the Atlantic, connecting past and present in a single moment of crystalline clarity. "The groom is your ex-partner. He's getting married in 2 months." The silence that followed the revelation was almost palpable. Clara remained motionless on the Parisian balcony, the phone still pressed to her ear as the information slowly penetrated her consciousness. Her ex-partner, the man who had abandoned her pregnant with quintuplets, was about to get married. And by some incomprehensible cosmic irony, her pastry shop had been chosen for the wedding cake. Have you ever felt like the universe was conspiring to create a specific moment in your life? An inevitable encounter between past and present that seemed written in the stars? "Clara?" Richard's worried voice brought her back to reality. "What happened?" She explained the situation in broken words, still processing the impact of the coincidence. The man who one day said she could never do it alone was now unknowingly seeking the services of the empire she had built from scratch. What an irony. A humorless laugh escaped her lips. Of all the pastry shops in the city, in the region, Richard watched her intently, trying to decipher her emotions. "What do you want to do?" It was a simple question, but loaded with possibilities. Refusing the order would be the most obvious option. Why voluntarily get involved with someone who had caused so much pain? On the other hand, there was something tempting about the idea of showing him, and showing herself, how much she had grown, prospered, flourished. "I want to make the cake," she finally declared, her voice finding its firmness. "I want to deliver it myself." Richard's eyes widened slightly. "Are you sure? We're in Paris for 2 more months. The timing is perfect," Clara finished. "Laurent mentioned that I could return for a week to oversee the inauguration of the new branch. We can adjust the dates." There was a determination in her gaze that Richard knew well, the same determination that had made her rise from the ashes when all seemed lost, the same silent strength that had guided her through every obstacle. "Then let's make it happen," he said simply, squeezing her hand in silent support. That night, after Richard fell asleep, Clara stayed awake, watching the lights of Paris from the bedroom window. Surprisingly, she felt no anger or resentment thinking about the impending meeting with her past. What she felt was a strange sense of closure, as if the universe was offering the opportunity to conclude a chapter of her life that had been left without a proper ending. She thought about the quintuplets, sleeping peacefully in the next room. Her daughters, who never knew their biological father, who were growing up happy and healthy, surrounded by love. She thought about Richard, whose quiet devotion had healed wounds she believed were permanent. She thought about her pastry shop, the opportunities opening up, and the bright future unfolding before her. What was left of the heartbroken woman on the kitchen floor 3 years ago Absolutely nothing. And perhaps that's what she needed to show. Not to him, but to herself. The preparations for the temporary return to Brazil were accelerated. Laurent, understanding the personal importance of the situation, though Clara had shared only the basics, reorganized the exchange schedule. The quintuplets, now completely adapted to Parisian life, received the news of the trip with childish excitement. For them, every move was an adventure. "Are we going to see Grandpa Gomez?" Lily asked, as Clara packed small bags for the week-long trip. "Yes, my love, and Aunt Rosa from the pastry shop, and Toby from the flower shop." Clara smiled as she saw the little face light up with every familiar name mentioned. The eve of their departure was marked by a special dinner organized by Laurent at his private apartment with a view of the Eiffel Tower. It was a temporary farewell dinner, but also a celebration. Laurent had made the invitation official for Sweet Dreams to establish a branch inside his Parisian hotel. "You conquered Paris in record time, ma chérie," the French chef declared, raising his glass in a toast. "Your talent transcends borders." Clara blushed slightly at the compliment, feeling genuinely honored. The quintuplets, dressed in their best outfits and behaving with surprising decorum thanks to a prior promise of a special dessert, watched the adults with curiosity. "What's Daddy Richard going to do while we're in Brazil?" Beatrice suddenly asked, her childish voice perfectly audible in the moment of silence that followed the toast. The innocent question momentarily froze everyone. It was the first time any of the girls had referred to Richard as Daddy, a title he had never requested or suggested, carefully respecting the boundaries and time needed to build that relationship. Richard's eyes filled with contained tears, his emotion palpable. Clara felt her own heart swell with a wave of love so intense it almost hurt. "Daddy Richard will stay here, finalizing some business," she replied softly, her eyes meeting his across the table, a silent conversation passing between them. "But he'll meet us in Brazil in a few days." Later, when they were alone getting ready for bed, Richard brought up the subject. "I didn't ask them to call me that," he said, almost defensively. "I would never suggest replacing—" Clara silenced him with a soft kiss. "I know. They chose. And they chose well." That night, protected by Richard's arms, Clara made two decisions that would change the course of her future. She would accept the key he had offered, not just as access to a house, but as entry into a new shared life. And she would confront her past, not with bitterness or a thirst for revenge, but with the serenity of someone who had already found her peace. The flight back to Brazil was smooth, with the quintuplets entertained by a collection of French books Laurent had insisted on giving them. Clara used the time to finalize the designs for the wedding cake, a creation that would be her technical masterpiece, the culmination of everything she had learned in recent years, and especially in recent weeks in Paris. It wouldn't just be a cake, it would be a declaration, not of resentment, but of triumph. Each layer, each detail, each nuance of flavor would tell the story of a woman who turned abandonment into strength, despair into determination, and tears into something sweet. The arrival in Brazil was met with a warm reception at the main pastry shop. Clara's team had grown significantly. There were now 2 stores in full operation, with a third in the final stages of preparation and the prospect of the Parisian branch on the horizon. From a borrowed corner in Mr. Gomez's bakery to a small, sweet empire, the journey was almost unbelievable. "The couple doesn't know you came back especially to prepare the cake," informed Rose, the head manager, as she updated Clara on the details of the order. "The bride, daughter of the businessman Tavares, has been visiting the pastry shop regularly to discuss details, but always with the event assistant. He never came in person." "That's better," Clara replied, examining the detailed notes. "I want it to be a surprise." The days that followed were filled with intense and focused work. Clara practically moved into the pastry shop kitchen, creating each element of the elaborate 5-tier cake with meticulous precision. The quintuplets alternated between spending time with Mr. Gomez, who was radiant to see his princesses again, and watching fascinated by their mother's creative process. "Why is this cake so special, Mommy?" asked Ava, the most observant of the 5, noticing the unusual intensity with which Clara worked. Clara paused, considering how to explain something so complex to a 3-year-old. "Because it's for someone who is part of our story," she finally replied. "Someone who helped us get to where we are today, even without knowing it." And the answer seemed to satisfy the little one, who nodded with the adorable seriousness that only children can display when they think they are understanding adult matters. On the eve of the wedding, when the cake was almost finished, a work of art in 5 tiers, each symbolically representing a year since the abandonment, decorated with refined French techniques but incorporating typically Brazilian flavors. Richard arrived from Paris. He entered the pastry shop after hours, finding Clara putting the final touches on her creation. The quintuplets were already asleep in the apartment above, exhausted after a day of play. "It's magnificent," Richard commented, looking at the cake with genuine admiration. "Worthy of a museum." Clara smiled, stepping back slightly to assess her work with a critical eye. "It had to be perfect. May I ask why?" Richard's voice was soft, non-judgmental. "Why is it so important to impress him?" "I'm not trying to impress him," Clara replied after a moment of reflection. "I'm honoring my own journey. Each layer of this cake represents a year of growth, of overcoming. The solid, broad base is the year when everything fell apart, and I had to rebuild from scratch. The second tier represents the birth of the girls and the opening of the first pastry shop. The third symbolizes the expansion, the recipe book, the public recognition. The fourth," she hesitated, a gentle smile appearing on her lips. "The fourth represents you, entering our lives. And the top, the 5th tier, represents Paris, the international expansion, and the future that opens up before us." Richard approached, hugging her from behind, his chin resting softly on her shoulder as they both admired the creation. "And tomorrow, you'll personally deliver this story to him." "Yes," Clara confirmed. "Not as an accusation or a confrontation, but as a silent thank you. His abandonment was the catalyst that forced me to discover a strength I didn't even know I possessed." The next morning, the cake was carefully transported to the luxurious hotel where the ceremony would take place. The quintuplets, dressed in elegant, coordinated pastel dresses, the colors of the pastry shop, accompanied Clara along with Richard, impeccable in his well-cut suit. The event team led them to an adjacent room to the main hall, where the cake would be kept refrigerated until the opportune moment. Clara had insisted on personally making the final adjustments and on-site assembly, ensuring absolute perfection. As she worked on the last details, she could hear the growing murmur of guests arriving, the soft music that announced the beginning of the ceremony, and eventually, the applause that indicated the conclusion of the vows. "It's time," the event coordinator announced, entering the room. "Can we take the cake now?" Clara took a deep breath, exchanging a meaningful look with Richard, who squeezed her hand encouragingly. "No," she replied calmly. "I'll take it myself." And so, with a heart that was strangely serene, Clara prepared to close the last chapter of her past and open the doors to a future she, 3 years ago, would never have dared to imagine. The ballroom was resplendent under the glow of hundreds of golden lights, strategically positioned to create a fairy tale atmosphere. Elaborate floral arrangements in shades of white and champagne adorned each table, while satin ribbons danced gently in the occasional breeze from the ventilation systems. 200 guests, elegantly dressed, chatted animatedly, glasses of sparkling wine in hand, celebrating the union that had just been made official. Have you ever experienced that unique moment of absolute clarity, when time seems to slow down, and every detail around you gains an almost supernatural sharpness? That's exactly what Clara experienced as she waited, her heart strangely calm, for the event coordinator's signal to enter the hall. "Remember what we agreed on?" she whispered to the quintuplets, crouching down to their height. 5 identical pairs of eyes stared back with the adorable seriousness that only 3-year-olds can display when they are given an important mission. "Walk in quietly and stay close to Uncle Richard," Maria replied, always the natural spokesperson for the group. Clara nodded, adjusting a loose ribbon on Beatrice's dress. The 5 girls were stunning in their coordinated pastel dresses, each wearing the color that had become their trademark since they were babies. The system Clara had developed to individualize without creating rivalries. Richard, standing a few steps behind with his characteristic confident posture, offered an encouraging smile. "We're ready when you are," the event coordinator reappeared, slightly out of breath. "It's the perfect moment. The bride and groom have just greeted the last guest in line and are heading to the main table. The master of ceremonies will announce the cake's entrance in exactly 2 minutes." Clara took a deep breath, positioning herself behind the cart where her masterpiece rested. The 5-tier wedding cake told the story of her personal metamorphosis in sugar and flour. Each detail had been meticulously planned, each flavor carefully chosen to represent a facet of her journey. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," the amplified voice of the master of ceremonies echoed through the hall, "let us prepare to receive the work of art that will sweeten this celebration of love. An exclusive cake from the internationally acclaimed Sweet Dreams Bakery." The double doors opened, and Clara, with the serene dignity of someone who knows her own worth, pushed the cart into the hall. The quintuplets followed right behind, in perfectly aligned formation, their small hands holding individual miniatures of the main cake, an idea Clara had the night before, symbolizing how something large could be divided and still maintain its essence. The murmur of conversation gradually ceased, replaced by murmurs of admiration as the guests noticed the magnificence of the creation. 5 tiers of confectionery perfection, each layer visually telling a story through refined decoration techniques, from the solid, structured base to the delicate arrangement of crystallized sugar flowers on top, a perfect fusion of Brazilian and French techniques. Clara kept her eyes fixed on her path, guiding the cart with precision down the central aisle. It was only when she reached the designated space near the main table that she allowed herself to look up directly into the face of the man who, 3 years ago, had destroyed and inadvertently rebuilt her life. The recognition was instantaneous and devastating. She saw the exact moment the color left his face, how his eyes widened in incredulous shock, and how his hand instinctively sought support on the nearest table. Beside him, the bride, an elegant young woman in a French lace dress that had clearly cost a fortune, looked confused from her distraught new husband to the unknown pastry chef. "Are you all right, darling?" the bride asked, her voice revealing genuine concern. He didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes were fixed not just on Clara, but on the 5 identical little figures, who were now positioned neatly next to the main cake, each one holding her miniature with obvious pride. "Mommy made the most beautiful cake in the world," Lily announced in her crystal-clear childish voice, the completely innocent comment echoing in the sudden silence that had taken over the hall. The bride, still confused, looked from the girls to Clara. You're the head pastry chef? Are they your daughters? Are they quintuplets? There was genuine admiration in her voice. It's extraordinary. I always follow sweet dreams on social media, but I never imagined the owner would come personally. Clara smiled gently. Some projects are too special to delegate, she replied simply. Her ex-partner remained paralyzed, as if he had seen a ghost. Or 5. And in a way, that was exactly it. The ghosts of the future he had abandoned now manifest in all their glory. Do you know each other? The bride now realized there was something more going on, her gaze alternating between her immobilized husband and the serenely confident pastry chef. It was Ava, always the most observant of the quintuplets, who innocently broke the deadlock. Pointing to the man in the impeccable suit, she asked aloud, "Mommy, is he the man from the old photo you kept in the special box?" The silence in the hall became palpable. Clara felt the weight of 200 gazes, but maintained her composure. Calmly, she adjusted one last sugar flower on the top of the cake before answering. "Yes, darling," she confirmed softly. "This is the man who, without knowing it, gave us the greatest gift of all, the chance to discover our own strength." The bride, whose initial indignation was now transforming into something more complex, took a step toward Clara. "You're—" her voice faltered momentarily. "He was?" "Yes," Clara confirmed, without rancor or accusation in her voice. 3 years ago. The transformation on the bride's face was extraordinary. Shock, then comprehension, followed by an indignation that flushed her cheeks under the perfect makeup. "You abandoned her when she was pregnant?" she asked her minutes-old husband, her voice trembling slightly. "With quintuplets?" He finally found his voice, although he could barely articulate more than a few incoherent sounds. "I didn't know. Quintuplets? I had no idea." "No, you didn't know," Clara agreed with serenity. "You left before I could tell you, and maybe it was better that way." Richard chose that moment to approach, positioning himself protectively beside Clara and the girls. His tall, confident presence, his impeccable suit, and the natural way the quintuplets snuggled around him told their own silent story. "Ladies and gentlemen," Clara announced, her clear voice reaching all corners of the hall, "I brought today not just a cake, but a message about transformation. Each tier of this creation represents a year of a journey that began in pain, but blossomed into immeasurable joy." Her eyes briefly met her ex-partner's before she continued. "This cake is my sincere gift to the newlyweds, not as a reminder of past mistakes, but as a celebration of how unexpected endings can lead to extraordinary new beginnings." The bride, whose initial indignation was now turning into something more complex, approached the cake, looking at it with new eyes. "It's truly magnificent," she commented softly. Then, turning to her husband with clear determination, "We need to talk, in private." As the couple walked away to a discreet corner of the hall, engaged in an intense conversation that involved the bride's animated gestures and his defensive posture, Clara began instructing the waiters on how to properly cut and serve the cake. It was then that she felt a light touch on her arm. Turning, she met the gaze of the bride's mother, an elegant woman with sharp eyes who seemed to be evaluating every detail of the situation. "My daughter always admired your work," the woman commented, her voice low enough to be a private conversation amid the chatter that was gradually returning to the hall. "Now I understand that she should admire not only your creations, but your integrity." Clara nodded in silent thanks, understanding what was not being said. That woman respected her decision not to turn the celebration into a humiliating public confrontation, even though she had every justification to do so. "Sometimes," Clara replied, "the greatest victory is simply living well." The woman smiled with contained approval before heading to where her daughter and son-in-law were still talking intensely. The quintuplets, having completed their mission of presenting the miniatures, were now sitting at a nearby table, charming guests with their impressive similarity and distinct personalities. Richard watched from a distance, ready to intervene if the guests' enthusiasm became excessive. When the cake began to be served, something unexpected happened. The bride returned to the main table alone, without her new husband. With determined gestures, she removed the newly placed wedding ring and set it on the table before signaling to the event coordinator. In a matter of minutes, a surprising announcement was made. The marriage was annulled. The celebration, however, would continue, not as a commemoration of a union, but as a party for female courage and new beginnings. In the bride's own words, Clara watched everything from a distance with mixed feelings. It had never been her intention to cause such a rupture, only to show her triumph and close a personal cycle. However, she recognized that each person had the right to set their own limits on what they could accept in a relationship. When it was time to leave, Clara gathered her daughters, exhausted but happy after becoming the temporary celebrities of the party. Richard efficiently organized their departure, demonstrating his characteristic quiet competence. At the ballroom door, they were surprised by the bride, or ex-bride, who caught up with them with hurried steps. "Wait!" she pleaded, something indefinable shining in her eyes. "I didn't come to apologize for him. I came to thank you." Clara watched her, curious. "You saved me today," the young woman continued, sincere emotion entering her voice. "Not just from a marriage to a man capable of abandoning his family, but from a life built on lies. If he could hide something so significant from his past, what other truths would remain hidden?" Before Clara could reply, the young woman crouched down to the quintuplets' level. "You are very special girls, you know. You have the bravest mother in the world." As she stood up, she handed Clara a business card. "I'm a curator at an art gallery. When you're ready to exhibit your creations as the true works of art they are, please get in touch." And so, with one last bittersweet smile, the young woman returned to her reinvented celebration, leaving Clara with an unexpected connection born from the ashes of failed relationships. In the limousine on the way to the hotel, where they would stay before returning to Paris, the quintuplets quickly fell asleep, exhausted from the day's intensity. Clara rested her head on Richard's shoulder, finally allowing herself to relax. "So," he murmured, gently kissing her hair. "How do you feel?" Clara considered the question, searching her heart for the most honest answer. "Free," she finally replied, "as if the last thread holding me to the past has been cut. As if now I can fly without any weight pulling me down." Richard intertwined his fingers with hers, the simple gesture laden with silent promises. "And where will we fly now with our 5 little navigators?" Clara smiled, the image of the future forming clearly in her mind. Paris first, to conclude the exchange. Then, that house in the hills with the big garden and room to grow. An international branch of sweet dreams. And maybe, she hesitated briefly, a gentle blush coloring her cheeks. Maybe a small ceremony, just for us, and truly special people. Richard's smile lit up his entire face. Sounds like the perfect plan. As the limousine glided through the lit streets, Clara watched the sleeping profiles of her daughters. Of all the recipes she had ever created, this one was, without a doubt, the most extraordinary. The recipe for turning abandonment into strength, tears into determination, and a devastating ending into a glorious new beginning. The world of pastry teaches a fundamental truth that applies equally to life. Sometimes, it's necessary to completely break the ingredients, eggs, nuts, barriers, hearts, to create something truly transcendent. The art lies in knowing how to recombine the fragments into something more beautiful and stronger than the original. 3 years ago, When her world collapsed in that kitchen, hearing the cruel words, "You'll never do it alone," Clara would never have imagined being where she was now. Not just surviving, but thriving. Not just existing, but shining. And perhaps this is the sweetest lesson of all. Endings aren't really endings, but simply doors to new beginnings. The true taste of victory isn't in proving something to someone who hurt you, but in proving to yourself that the journey was worth every tear, every sleepless night, and every obstacle overcome. As she closed her eyes, nestled in Richard's protective embrace, Clara felt a deep peace envelop her. The cycle was complete. The story had found not an end, but a perfect evolution. And the future, like an unbaked cake, waited with all its infinite possibilities. After all, life, like pastry, is both a science and an art. Part precise technique, part spontaneous inspiration. And Clara had mastered both dimensions, creating her most significant masterpiece. A full life, built with love, courage, and that secret ingredient that turns the ordinary into the extraordinary. The indomitable resilience of the human spirit. What do you think of Clara's decision to deliver the cake herself? Was it the right move?